Forever Sophist, and we're going to be doing part 2 now of 46 Reasons to Doubt Christianity. Number 28, going with social and psychological factors. Faith is often geographical. Most people are Christian not based on anything more than where they were born. If you look at the percentage of the high amount of Christians in, say, the United States, Western European countries, African countries as well these days, you see that there are many, many Christian people there, whereas there are much fewer Christians in, say, Mongolia or China or Thailand or Japan. So why is it that something which is supposed to be a universal truth is geographically constrained, right? We see things that are universal present throughout cultures and throughout countries. So things like the distribution of people's blood types, right? Or how people's personalities form. If you believe, that people's personality traits follow that kind of ENTP, INFJ sort of figure, there's actually a pretty even distribution of those across the globe. Whereas religion is not so. Religion is geographically biased, right? So what that to me indicates that Christianity is not a source of ultimate truth, but more so a source of culture. Number 29, psychological mechanisms explain religious experiences better than saying they're religious experiences. So, for example, you may have people going through a traumatic life event and saying they felt God speak to them directly, right? When they maybe were about to go into surgery, they prayed to God, and they felt after they recovered, they had this presence from God come to them, right? Or maybe somebody who was in a war, right? Maybe they were in a near-death experience, and they felt that God came to them and helped them live through it. Or maybe you have someone you prayed over, right? Someone who maybe who actually did die for a moment and then came back, or their heart stopped and they came back and they said that they saw heaven or they saw hell, right? That would obviously be enough to make somebody religious. But the thing is, there's no consistency with these experiences. They're all anecdotal. And the better explanation then for these anecdotal experiences would be how our mind likes to create images. It likes to make us believe things that didn't necessarily happen. And so when you get to a near-death state, you can get into a traumatic episode, and you have these experiences that seem quite real, but they're no more than just your brain releasing tons of dopamine to cope with something, and you having a psychological experience, whether it be hallucinogenically, augmented, or just because of the traumatic experience itself. It's easier to say that it's a natural cause than it is an actual religious experience. Number 30, fear-based indoctrination is common in Christian upbringing. I can speak to this personally. Some religions, most denominations of Christianity teach fear of punishment to instill belief. So when you look at this critically, this isn't actually a logical reason to believe in something. It's a threat. I've spoken about this before, but essentially when you tell somebody that if you don't have faith, you won't get grace, and so you will die and go to hell, that is not a reason to believe in something. That is simply a threat. That's as much a reason to believe in the truth of something as it is to believe in the truth of a burglar, right? Because they're pointing a gun at you and you decide to give them your money. You're not giving them your money for any good reason, i.e. you think that they're equivalent to some great charity that will help, promote the welfare of an impoverished community, or this burglar who came up is actually your relative and you want to do good by them, or they're actually, a legitimate establishment that'll help return on your investment there. And give you a great interest rate. There's no logical reason for you to give money to a burglar except that they're threatening you with violence. And that's the same thing about faith in Christian upbringing. You are threatened with the violence of eternal damnation to believe God's existence. Number 31, we'll say, is along that line, social pressures, not truth, often sustain belief. And I do think this is a challenging thing, something I'm writing about in my book, actually, that a lot of Christians deal with, and that maybe they personally even believe, yeah, okay, maybe it's not, and they start having these doubts, they start pulling the thread, so to speak, but the community around them is very Christian, or their community is a church, perhaps. So you can't have leave from that. Your community is pushing you into it. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge there, and I think that's the challenge with most people in religious settings. I think Religions for Breakfast actually does some interesting videos on these about how Christianity is unique in that we look specifically at the presence of the religion as belief in the existence of God, right, or gods, but other religions don't even require belief per se. It's more about just practicing cultures. It's more just about like doing things, right? It's more about the events themselves. So you are able to divorce the community aspect from like the psychological and philosophical framework that you exist in those religions. But Christianity is unique in that it's all encompassing. And so the social pressures you have to exist within a Christian community are one of them too. I think some of the more egregious Christian groups too are, for example, the Seventh-day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as Mormons who do incredible ostracization practices to those who leave their communities. Number 32 then we'll say is religious experiences that are not unique to Christianity, yet present across other religions. So this is maybe a cringe atheist rebuttal, but I do think it still is meritful, and that you can still give a great testimony to the feeling you have of Jesus being in your life and fulfilling your heart, but so too can a Muslim talk about Allah in that presence. So too could a Hindu talk about Vishnu in that same way, and so too could an ancient Greek talk about Poseidon in the same light. There's no consistency and there's nothing unique expressly about this feeling, right? Religious experiences have existed throughout time, and so it's not an indication that Christianity is true because it's this unique thing. As an aside, an interesting rebuttal to this is that, well, yeah, I mean, it just proves that a God is true. They're just wrong about which one, right? All these people having these religious experiences is an indication that there is some truth there. They're just off kilter, right? They're looking at the light with the wrong sort of lenses, so to speak. And I think this is I don't want to say it's dishonest because maybe they are saying this out of honesty, right? Everyone has a sort of concept of a god or gods and they're just looking at it wrong. But you can see at the very least it is quite arrogant, right? It's quite arrogant to say that everybody has it vaguely right. We're just the group that have it exactly right. And this happens even within Christianity. If you're familiar with all of the sects and the denominations and the belief systems within Christendom, as it arrogantly dubs itself. It is interesting, though. I do enjoy a good partake in the Christian lore, as much I do in Lord of the Rings, for example. But that's another conversation for another day. Number 33, and this kind of tailors off of number 31 too, in that religion can exploit human fears, particularly Christianity. So often addressing these existential fears, right, about, for example, the punishment of hell, which can be seen as leveraging human vulnerability. So it does not just say that, hey, believe in me or you're going to hell, but it also pushes you to move, right? It says, believe in me. Okay, if you're believing in me, then you have to act this way, right? You have to proselytize. You have to hold this certain set of beliefs. Otherwise, it's not Christ-like. Otherwise, it's not, working in the right way. Otherwise, you're living in sin. How do you know you're saved? Some denominations of Christianity are harsher than this than others. I know that in Mormonism, for example, they have a very much more works-based approach to understanding their salvation. And so they have to be maximally good, as I understand it. So you have this constant fear in the back of your mind of, not getting into the best heaven in Mormon mythology. And that is the driving force to having you, wear suits, get on bicycles, not drink coffee or tea, and do a bunch of other fun stuff. Other denominations of Christianity too have this exploitive tactic they use. So this is just another reason to doubt. Moving on then to number 34 is that confirmation bias supports belief despite there being evidence otherwise. And what this means is believers of Christianity, right, they may interpret information in ways that reinforce existing beliefs, disregarding any contradictory evidence. Have you ever been friends with, or maybe you are a victim yourself of, you have an idea of how something is, but there is counterexamples to it. And so if you want to Google search, right, or I suppose these days put into an LLM, you want to search up, my view is true. What you do is you simply just search your view is true, right? You view A is true, and then you collect all of those. See, look at that. See, told you so, I was right, you're wrong, I was right, this is here, it's all about me, I'm right. And then all of the counterexamples, you do this. You just kind of wave it off, right? Disregard it, okay? So there's all of this, and it's confirmation bias because you already have, as a Christian, the idea that Christianity is true. And so this is at the forefront of your mind. And so when you have this kind of, framework, I hate that I use a framework so much. It's because I work in corporate world. So I apologize for my annoying words that I use. You have this framework that you're stuck in and you can't escape it. So that's why, even if there's this much evidence, say that, let's pick an example. Okay, that trans people are trans, and having people identify as trans and accepting them as they are is the best in terms of their psychology and in terms of our ethics as a society. Biologically speaking, right, gender is not a binary. It's a very heavily skewed, but still indeed a spectrum, right? Let's stick with that one. That's a more scientific one, right? So you can say gender isn't a binary. It's actually a spectrum. Okay, that's a claim. And if you're a Christian, a generic Christian, you probably say, no, there's only two genders, right? I know there are liberal Christian denominations, but those are the minority. And so when you have this, well, Christianity is true, right? So whatever Christianity says is true. So you already have this confirmation bias. You're going to look up, if you even are, how many genders are there, right? Or what is gender? Is gender just two, or is there a spectrum to gender? And so there's going to be, of course, actual, biological studies, anthropic studies, right? Anthropological studies, studies on the human genome, about the chromosomes in human, about how gender becomes a thing, right? And all of these scientific journals today are all pointing to the fact that gender is not male and female. Gender is a spectrum. But maybe you have a couple conservative think tanks. You have a couple non-peer-reviewed articles published that say gender is male and female only, okay? So you have the accepted body of scientific works, and then you have your cherry-picked evidence. And so you are always looking at here. You always have to be looking at here for hot topics when it comes to ideas from Christianity. And so that's something, if you take a step back and look at Christians, you have to say it's a bit strange that you always have to do so much work for this when this exists. Okay? So that would be another reason to doubt Christianity. I would say number 35, on top of that, people are rewarded socially for conforming to faith, right? Religious communities often provide social benefits to adherents, incentivizing conformity. So this is a very, time and true tradition of don't ask too many questions, just kind of do what's asked of you, and follow along, right? This, if you have gone to school, for some reason, is backwards of everything we learn. You don't want to obviously question everything into absurdity where you are just a skeptic at everything and you have nothing left. You're just kind of in an insane wormhole. That's something I also am writing about too, about grappling with the idea of living in a world where nobody's watching as a non-religious person, and how you can kind of get your bearings straight. But the trend of Christianity is to say, well, we reward the faithful. It literally says in Christianity that faith is a virtue. Yet everything we understand about science, about every academic pursuit, and honestly, even with every human interaction you have, being curious, right? Asking questions, trying to understand and learn more, and challenging your views is how you grow and develop as a person, right? In every sense, if you're a teacher and you have students and they are asking lots of questions, those are the good students. Those are the good students, right? If you have people you meet, and whether it's for a friendship or a romantic relationship, if they ask a lot of questions about you, and they want to know more about you, then that's a great sign, right? You don't want someone that just says, oh well, John said he's he's happy, so there we go, right? They just hold on to this idea. There's no curiosity to actively learn more or challenge your views. Then you're stuck, right? You would always look in some sort of field of research and say, okay, those who are just sticking with the status quo, even in business, right? Those companies that are just staying in the status quo will be tread upon, will be outshone by the companies that continuously develop, right? Researchers will be outshone by other researchers who continuously ask more questions and do more research. Yet religion is the one thing, in Christianity in particular, that encourages you to have a faith that is not moving, right? To not doubt. And doubts are counted as a challenge. Doubts are counted as moving away from that is good, right? Which is faith. So that's something that you should also look at, and as another reason to doubt, when the the question of even doubting itself is something that is looked into question. Let me give you another example. If you have like an audit of some organization, and the organization does as much legal barriers as they can to prevent the audit from going cleanly, and then organization B, they say, yeah, here is our tax documents, here is our margins and losses, here is everything that we've ever written, here's everything that we've ever received, here you go. This is actually also public information, right? Which organization is more trustworthy? It's going to be the one with the open book of business, right? It's going to be the one that wants you to challenge it. It wants to be audited and show. There are literally certifications for organizations that require them to be audited regularly by third parties, i.e., being challenged to their own views, their own statuses, and putting that into question. And that being challenged is better proof that they're doing a good job, right? And so in every other scenario than Christianity, you are more trustworthy if you accept people doubting you, in the scenario of Christianity, it attacks you for doubting it. So that's another reason, ironically, to doubt Christianity. That's some dubious behavior, I would say, in most other circumstances. Number 36, religious belief correlates with lower scientific literacy in some cases. I don't want to talk about this in too much extent because this is more of a correlation than a causation, I'd say. But studies have found associations between certain beliefs in Christianity and skepticism towards scientific concepts. Right? I gave the example of gender earlier, on where people who are Christian tend to also doubt things like gender, but then people who are also Christian tend to doubt things like evolution, doubt things like global warming for a variety of reasons, doubt things like the origin of the universe, the age of the earth. So this is, I think, another good reason to doubt Christianity. Number 37, Christianity discourages doubt and questioning, right? We just talked about this at length as in, conforming to faith, right? You are rewarded for being faithful, but you are actively discouraged to doubt and question. Some doctrines view doubt as a weakness or a sin, right? You're basically being tempted by Satan, is one interpretation. Now, to be fair, there are some Christians who say if you have doubts, explore those doubts. I have heard them before. And actually, when I was going through my deconversion, I did get the advice of Christians to walk into the darkness, so to speak, because they trusted their God would, pull me back. Unfortunately, I walked into the darkness and I kind of stayed there, as they would, I suppose, view it. But most Christian ideas discourage you to doubt and consider it basically being tempted, right? A temptation from the devil or Satan. So that, again, for the reasons I talked about earlier with how, obviously we should be doubting, we should be challenging our beliefs. The fact that doubt itself is put into question, well, that's something that I think is worthy of doubt itself. And then the last section here of ideas is about epistemological doubts. Now, 38, for example, faith is belief without sufficient evidence, okay? So faith often involves accepting claims without empirical proof. And there are many Christians who say, well, faith plus evidence. Faith is basically, in my view, a catch-all term for believing something that doesn't have evidence, right? And I essentially never believe anything without evidence. I would actually, and I think I talked about this in the Divine Hiddenness, I would love to believe in God. I would love to have, the grace of Jesus pour into my heart if it was real, okay? But I just cannot accept anything that I don't think is real because it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of my time and my energy. And if you want me to believe in something, then you need to provide evidence or a reason. Faith is just that asking for your belief without a reason. And people try to give counterexamples like, well, you have faith in your partner and your spouse and your children and your friends. Is that faith, though? I would call that trust. And the reason you have that trust is because you do actually have evidence. What that evidence is your existing relationship up until now, right? If you have a friend, they're your friend because you have interacted with them for a certain amount of time, right? To put it in the most alien-sounding description possible of what friendship is. But you're friends with them because you interact with them regularly, right? If you're married to someone, you have faith in them, you trust them because you have gotten to this point in time where you have dated them, you have gotten to know them, you have made legal, financial, and relationship type commitments to this person based on that. So you don't have faith in them, you have trust in them because of your existing relationship. Your family raised you, right? Your parents raised you. And so you're not just putting blind faith or blind trust into your parents. You have literally imprinted in you from birth this concept of two people, usually raising you and doing everything they can to protect you. Generally, I'm speaking generally, but it's not in a vacuum that you have trust or faith. It's always based off of something, based off of evidence, right? And so the idea that, and sometimes apologists these days will even start to say, like, yeah, I can't prove to you the resurrection, for example. In the end, it is just faith. Well, if in the end it is just faith, then there is no evidence, right? Because faith is, in my interpretation, belief without evidence. So that's a reason, I think, to doubt Christianity. When you're told that the last part of believing is just accepting it on faith, then you're being told to accept something without evidence. Number 39, Christianity appeals to mystery to evade rational inquiry. This is another good one, right? If you ask, how can an all-loving, all-powerful God, we talked about this in part 1, right, allow tsunamis to happen, allow leukemia to exist? Well, a big explanation here is God works in mysterious ways. And this is to say that us meek humans could never understand the grand plan that God would have, being a divine super being. But that is a very broad brushstroke to excuse everything that should be inexcusable, right? And so again, I look back to what I talked about a moment ago, the organizations that allow you to audit them and that want you to put some question into them, and the organizations that say, they put up all the legal barriers and want you to trust them at their word. Why is it that we're being told, well, God works in mysterious ways, when you try and actually argue with the position of God, the alleged position of God? Okay. Number 40, revelation is subjective and unverifiable. And a big part of the Christian Bible, that Christians may not like to admit, defining the doctrine of Christianity, is Paul's personal revelations as they were written, right? And this isn't something we could ever test or verify, right? You're able to test and verify how heavy something is, how a piece of material can work. You can test historical evidence too, right? By looking at archaeological data, doing carbon dating. There's a plethora of things you can do, but when it comes to revelation, that is something that you have to simply take someone's word on. Like, yeah, no, I experienced God. I experienced it. I had this revelation. So there's no way to test it, and you would never be able to have it. One big reason people are Christian is that they have a personal type of revelation. And for them, I say, well, congratulations. I wish I had that. Otherwise, I might be Christian, but I haven't had that. And so I'm not Christian. That's as simple as it is. And the doctrine of Christianity itself is based on much revelation, right? And so when you realize, well, okay, you need a revelation, you need some sort of subjective, unverifiable thing to allow you personally to believe in it. And that thing itself is also based off of unverifiable, subjective things, i.e., the writings of Paul, for example. Then it becomes really dubious. Number 41, I'll say that there's no consistent method for distinguishing true from false religions. And so that goes with Christianity too, right? One brilliant, I think it was Hitchens' quote that said, you could have no religion to be true, right? But you can't have all religions be true. You could have one religion be true and the rest false. You could have some religions be true that are mutually exclusive, but then still the rest need be false, right? But you could never have all be true, right? And because they claim, especially religions after religions with Christianity and afterwards, they claim exclusivity, right? That this God is true, these gods are false, and even if it didn't claim exclusivity, its interpretation of how God or gods work is something that we can't test, right? So not only is it possible to test the existence of God, it's impossible to verifiably test which alleged God or gods are more or less true than other ones, right? So there's no clear criterion to adjudicate, among any religion or really denominations within Christianity. We can get in there, but the reasoning, there's no answer solved for Christianity. And it's a continuous circle of thickening, which is interesting, I think, to look from the outside in, with how Orthodox people argue with Catholics, argue with Protestants, argue with different denominations within Protestantism, is that there is no clear way to, determine what is true amongst religions. And number 42, then I would say Christians disagree on what the Bible means, and that piggybacks off of what you're just talking about how they can't agree what religion is true. Well, Christians can't agree what the Bible means, and a church, more liturgical Christian, like a Orthodox or a Catholic or something, might say, well, we don't have that problem, arrogantly, because obviously the Protestant Reformation led to the leaving of a centralized church and into these what you may call disparate, or not disparate, but I'm forgetting English right now. Disparate, thank you. Disparate churches, disparate belief systems, disparate different kind of conclaves of churches, all these different communities of churches, right? So there's no one single interpretation, okay? That, I think, points to how there is not truth in Christianity. I think it points to the fact that this is so dubious, points to it being like any other book or work of literature, or any other religion or myth that has existed. And for the Catholics and the Orthodox, okay, maybe they presentably have some sort of unified, codified set of beliefs, and so they all agree on what the Bible says. But this hasn't changed. This has changed over time, right? New popes come and decree different things and different interpretations of Scripture and how it ought to occur, right? The Second Vatican Council had said that the Latin Mass is to be done with. So was it the case that the Latin Mass was always, the best to be done, or was it always okay to do it in the vernacular? In the past, it wasn't. Now it was. So and that's just one idea. Obviously, what the church says and does is different from what the Bible apparently means. But there's no absolute central interpretation of the Bible that everyone will agree upon. Even, there's like updates to the Catholic Catechism, right? So it's not like it's a set in stone proof, like Pythagorean's theorem, right? That you just have and everyone can agree upon. It always is full of debate, just like debate about your favorite Star Wars movie, debate about your favorite Lord of the Rings movie. I like Lord of the Rings. I think it's obvious. Debate on your interpretation of How to Kill a Mockingbird, right? It's all interpretive. The next point I would say, 43, is arguments for God often rely on gaps in knowledge. And this is the God of the gaps argument I'm sure you've heard before. If you haven't, let me tell you what the God of the gaps is. You can imagine an ancient civilization. They did not know what caused the waves. They did not know what caused waves, and so they thought a god caused waves. They invented a god, which was the reason for why the waves existed. But then eventually they learned that, well, actually it's the moon. The moon pulls on the tide, and the tide causes waves to form. So it's not actually a god that's causing waves. Well, a god created the moon, right? Or a god is the moon. And so the moon god is there. Well, actually, we found out that the moon does it without any active force. It's just gravity, right? The moon's gravity. And we found out that the moon is actually likely from a kind of asteroid that came off 1 billion years ago. Well, maybe that asteroid from 1 billion years ago was the work of a god. So you find that, right, from the waves to the moon to the asteroid, your whole for what a god can explain gets smaller and smaller, right? Everything from weather to how you interact with other people to volcanoes erupting was all explained by gods at one point in human history, but they all found scientific explanations. And so we know that, and even Christians today will say it's not, well, they'll say it's not, they'll still say it's God causing these things, but but it's God guiding the process, right? Instead of a literal God directly pulling the waves, Christians understand that it's the moon, moon's pull of gravity. I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist. I don't know the exact specific proper way to say it, but the moon's gravity causing the tide, causing the waves to exist. Yet they'll say God guides it in a sense, right? We know that humans were not hand created to exist. We come from a series of natural selection, evolution, right? Yet Christians who accept that will say, well, God guided evolution, right? So whatever this great work guiding is doing, I'm not sure. That's not something we can test, and that's something that a hole gets smaller and smaller to fill as we describe more and more about our universe. So that's the God of the gaps fallacy, and you still see it today. It's been a human civilization long fallacy that is still used today. Number 44 is around personal experiences being easily misinterpreted. So kind of changing gears here, but subjective experiences, for example, are prone to error and cannot reliably substantiate universal truths. And such a big thing like the truth of the universe, the existence of a God, the point of human existence are in so many ways explained through personal experiences. We talked about this earlier where, revelations are subjective and unverifiable, but personal experiences can also be interpreted in any different amount of ways. You have gospel accounts all contradicting each other, for example, with how Jesus allegedly rose from the grave, right? And so all of these personal experiences for how somebody lived their life can only explain as much as their own personal experience. I don't think you can have a personal experience explain substantial universal truths like this. And even if you could, how would you know that you're interpreting that correctly? Number 45, I would say logical fallacies often or almost always underline apologetic arguments. So we just talked about the God of the gaps fallacy. And I think Rationality Rules on YouTube does a really great job of kind of like, here's that fallacy, here's that fallacy, here's that fallacy, dissecting the errors used in apologetic arguments. But if you listen to what Christian apologists are saying, they always use some kind of misrepresentation of facts, some kind of straw manning of arguments, some sort of direct or indirect, diversion from truth to present themselves as speaking the truth. So you'll see that from many a different way. I did like the recent Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists video, where we talked about the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? I don't think Jordan Peterson is like a Christian apologist, but the point is that if you look at actual other apologists and hear them talking like William Lane Craig, for example, there's always fallacies being employed in so many different ways. I think in my opinion, the ultimate fallacy I see, ultimate meaning, they always come back to this, is a kind of special pleading. It's always a kind of special pleading, which is kind of like, rules for thee, but not for me. So the special pleading would be, well, it's God, so it's okay, right? It's God, so X, Y, Z. On the topic of, for example, genociding the Canaanites in the ancient texts of the Bible, for the topic of the existence, the understanding of the universe as a whole, etc. These are always full of logical fallacies and always point to what am I forgetting? Always point to special pleading. Thank you. Okay. The last one, and I would like to talk about this in much more detail in the future. It is something I'm currently writing about, but you can have secular ethics. You can have morality from a secular perspective without invoking God whatsoever. And in fact, you can have it be much more robust than any sort of Christian-based or theistic-based morality would have been. One big challenge that theists, Christians, give to atheists is, well, if there's no God, there's no one telling you what's right from wrong. What's stopping you from raping, killing, and stealing? And the actual answer to that is because you have morals. It's the greatest irony, but the reason that people aren't just doing whatever it is Christians imagine people do without God, which is, going crazy, murdering, etc. It's because people have robust morals. It's actually the greatest irony, I think, in this whole discourse. You can have morals without God. Robust morals without God. I don't think you need me to explain further why, but, well, if you're generally curious, if you're stuck in that Christian box and you don't know how you can have morals without God, it's because you can have morals without God for the same reason you can have numbers without God, for the same reason you can have birthdays without God, for the same reason you can have days of the week without God, for the same reason you can have maps of territories without God. Morals in and of themselves is not a real thing like hydrogen is, sure, but it's a useful fiction. It's a useful fiction to understand the world around us. Alex O'Connor made a really good analogy that I saw from a video of his a while back. I think, by the way, I'm 1 year older than Alex O'Connor, if I'm not mistaken. Side note. And it was that there's a rule with using guns, and it's that you always assume the gun is loaded, right? So even if, for example, right, you know that there are no bullets, no shells in the gun, you would never point it at anybody's face because you have this rule, this every gun person's law that they assume the gun is loaded. And what is that but not a useful fiction? We all know it's possible the gun, in fact, isn't loaded, but we still use that rule anyway. We all know, for example, I'm going to jump ship here, so stick with me. We all know that if you don't have a God or whatever, right? Just killing somebody, sure. I'll swallow the whole pill that Christians are wanting me to swallow. Is, yeah, sure. If you kill someone, it's no different from just moving matters meaninglessly in the world than any other way, right? You're taking the knife of molecules and putting it in the other knife of molecules of the person in front of you and moving their blood molecules and rib molecules and heart molecules out of the way to stop them from breathing, right? And so it's no different than kicking a soccer ball, than eating a roll of cheese, than slapping your butt, right? It's all just kind of meaningless noise. Except that we can form laws, we can form rules that we follow because they're pragmatic for us, because they help us as a society, right? And so you don't need them to be necessarily true to have them be true for us as humans, right? You can understand that, yeah, we're in a sense, we all are just kind of matter. This is the existential kind of nihilist truth that you have to grapple with. Sure, we all are just matter. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But that doesn't mean I still don't go to work, pay taxes, raise kids, enjoy the weekends, and don't murder people, right? Just because it's not fundamentally true doesn't mean it's not true to you and me as humans. And so that being said, of course you can have morals without God. And in fact, like how science is made better by constant reiteration, challenging its beliefs, and always doing more research, our moral and ethical frameworks also get better day and day because we challenge them and because we develop them, right? A decade ago, 2 decades ago, to be frank with you, being a white middle income family, WASP, right, Protestant person being raised, I probably wouldn't have said the kindest thing. I'm just gonna say I wouldn't have said the kindest thing towards gay people, right, because of my upbringing, I would say it that way. I wouldn't have said the kindest thing towards gay people, right? You would hear kids using, religious or not, in the schoolyard, so to speak, the term gay as like an insult. And it still is, don't get me wrong, but that's changed so much because we understand that, wait, there's actually nothing wrong with being gay whatsoever. And so there's nothing really to insult anybody about, right? And the culture and society has evolved, right? And you actually do this with your eyeballs if you see someone on TV saying something homophobic or offensive to gay people. It's like, oh man, that person is so out of touch, because our morality adjusts and adapts. So to the Christian saying you can't have morality without God, you can have morality without God, and I think it's quite better without it. So those are, last video in this one, 46 reasons to doubt Christianity, and I hope you enjoyed this series of videos.